And welcome back. We are going to continue talking about strings today. Specifically, we're going to look at a new concept known as concatenation. And believe it or not, we have been using this to a certain extent, but now we're going to actually formalize it just a little bit. So when we start talking about concatenation, all right, this is a kind of a fancy little terminology that gets thrown around, but it simply just means that we're going to join two strings together. And when we join strings together, we use the plus operator in order to make those two strings act as one. Now, this act of joining two strings is simply just known as concatenation. All it means is to join or to append two strings into one. Now, this can either happen within our print statement, or we can use it to change the value of a string. So, for example, we have a string noun equals strings and string sentence. If I now say sentence equals noun plus are cool, and I print out sentence, it'll say strings are cool. All right, and it's going to do that because it's joining together strings and are cool. And you'll also notice it's not just joining them together, but it's restoring it back into the value of sentence. So before here, sentence doesn't have a value, but now it's equal to this value of these two joined strings. Now, you will note that there is an extra spacing after the word string. So if I look right here, it's S-T-R-A-N-G-S space and then my quotes. All right, the reason why there's a space there is because it prevents the two phrases from getting smashed together. If you don't put a space here, you're going to find that your strings, of course, are literally sitting on top of each other. So your words might look like a long run-on sentence. All right, so in this example, if we had run this without that space and we had said strings are cool, we instead would get strings are cool. But if you notice, there is no space here between strings and are if we hadn't put that space here. Now, let's just say we want to concatenate a space. All right, let's say, because obviously the space is a character, right? And let's just say we want to add a blank space between two strings. The strings themselves don't necessarily have that blank space in them. All right, so if I have string 1 is hello and 2 is world, you'll notice neither of these strings have an extra space. There's not one here at the end of hello, and there's not one here before world. All right, and that's because sometimes when we have these, we aren't necessarily anticipating there to be a space there because we don't know how those strings are going to be used. So if we concatenate the strings, though, as they are, we're going to get hello world, but with no spacing. Of course, we would expect that these are two separate words. We would expect there to be a space in there. So if we wanted to say hello world, we need to concatenate or join in a blank space in quotes between the two strings. So just as an example, we can say system.println 1 plus space in quotes plus 2. And if we have that, it would then say hello world as we expected because we just joined in a space. So this is a kind of a cool thing that we can do with strings. You'll notice that we don't simply just have a string plus another string. We can also join in other strings, other characters, other numeric types as we're going to see. So concatenation can be very, very powerful. Now, a special note about concatenation. The thing you have to understand is that Java is automatically going to treat anything inside of system.println as a string if one of the objects in there is a string. Now, what does that mean, you might wonder? What does it mean if everything's going to be a string? Well, if it doesn't have a string, it's going to treat it just as a normal arithmetic operation. So if we look at these two examples here, system.println 100 in quotes, meaning it's a string, plus 42, we're going to output 10042. All right, because it's simply just going to join 42 as a string. All right, but if I do system.println 100 without the quotes, just as a regular 100 plus 42, I'm going to output 142. Because again, this is going to look and say, hey, there's no strings in here, so this must be a numeric operation. Oh, here I have quotations, or if this was, let's say, a variable that was a string type, if let's say the variable was number plus 42, we would also get a string type here. Now, we can kind of get around this just a little bit by using extra parentheses to tell Java, hey, I want you to first add numbers before you concatenate them. So, for example, if I system.println the sum is, and I put in parentheses 100 plus 42, we would then get 142 in that sum because Java is going to look and see these parentheses and say, hey, according to precedence rules, according to orders operations, I need to go ahead and first do these parentheses before I do this joining, this plus operator here. So that's a good way to kind of remember this. Like if we have parentheses here, it's going to, again, follow orders operation because this is addition. These are parentheses. Parentheses come higher. So a nice little thing to kind of remember there. All right, and in our code, if we look at it, I went ahead and created some sample strings here. So I have string first, string is hello. second string is my friend, operation string is the value of, and I just have two quick ints here. I have num1 and num2 equal to 1 and 4 respectively. So just to start this off just by testing this, if I just go ahead and print out first string, you'll see we get hello with our comma here, and you'll notice that matches this exactly. Now, what would happen if I were to join this with second string? So if I want to say hello my friend, I of course could try typing in here, quote, hello my friend, or since we have a variable called second string which has that value, I can join that in here. And when I do that, and if I run my program, you'll see we get hello my friend. Now if you notice, I have a space here. Again, if I don't have that space here, if I take that space out and I just go ahead and rerun my program, you'll see how that program now has removed that space and put these words kind of on top of each other. Now, if that space wasn't there, we of course, just like we talked about in the notes, can go ahead and concatenate in a space character. Now, one thing I am going to caution you with here is when we put this space character in, you see it works great, but if you just put quotations with no space in here, that's technically what's called an empty string. We haven't really talked about empty strings yet, but in this case, this string is not going to do anything. It's going to join, but nothing's going to happen. And you'll see it goes right back to as if the string wasn't even here. So always make sure that you actually press the space bar at least once here to get that space in there. Now, let's look at this with the numeric types here. How does this look if I start putting in numeric types into my program? What is that going to do here? So we have, of course, one called operation string. And if I say operation string plus, let's just say num1, and let's go ahead and run our code, we get the value of 1, which is fine because, again, here it's simply just giving us value of num1, which is perfectly fine. But what if I say plus num2? All right, so now we're saying, hey, I want to add 1 and 4. Well, 1 and 4 should be 5. If I run this code, we get the value of 14. That doesn't seem quite right because, again, remember how Java is doing this is it's interpreting this whole thing as a string. If I just have one variable in here, it's not a big deal because it's just going to go ahead and just print out that value. And that's perfectly fine. But if I wanted to know what these both are, I need to put these both first in parentheses. And then if I run it, you'll see I get the value of 5. Now, of course, there's another way to get around this if we didn't want to do it this way. If let's say I just wanted to leave this as num1 plus num2, but I didn't want to have to deal with all this, you could, of course, always create a third variable just as like a temporary one and add them up that way. So that way when you put this into your code here, don't forget your type there, you can just change this to num3 and you will notice that your program then would, of course, give us the correct value. So there's a couple ways to get around that, but again, I want you to make sure that you see exactly what happens when we go ahead and start putting in those variables, what that ends up doing with those as a string when we concatenate.